It is my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker for tonight. She is a music marketing director and owner of a music publishing company. She served 6 years as mayor of Oak Hill. She is a graduate of Sarah Lawrence College and Vanderbilt University Owen Graduate School of Management. And she has served as a state senator for the 20th District since 2021. If that's not enough, she is also a mother of 2 young adult children and 3 golden doodles. Our talk tonight will include an overview of Governor Lee's school voucher scam. You get my innuendo there. Navigating an often hostile legislature dominated by Christian Nationalists and her hopes for the next General Assembly. And following her presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. You can either submit your questions online in the Q&A link, or we have in the back of the room for all of you in person some cards on which you can write that question, and we'll address those at the end. Please pass those cards to the front of the room when we get to that part of the program tonight. And as a reminder, AU is a nonpartisan 501c3 corporation. We do not endorse or oppose any incumbent, any candidate for office, or any political party. So please give a warm welcome to State Senator Heidi Campbell.
Thank you so much. I'm always short for these microphones. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me tonight. And that was a wonderful song. And what I loved about that song is that the progression of it really took you somewhere. Because initially, of course, in this day and age, when you hear build a wall, you're thinking something entirely different. And so I love the fact that that song takes you on a little bit of a journey, which is a very important journey. And I think kind of what we're here to talk about. So, serving in the state legislature in Tennessee right now is not for the faint of heart. It's definitely never boring. And right now we're going through some real complicated legislation as it's sort of back end loaded. And so the really caustic, what I would call caustic stuff is coming up right now. And it's very, very important when we're thinking about separation of church and state, because I have started just being very honest with people and saying we are living in a totalitarian state that is pushing very hard the first stages of an attempt to turn our entire country, frankly, our entire world into a theocracy. And that sounds a little crazy, but I think for people who are really paying attention to Project 2025, and if you're not familiar with that, I'm guessing most of you are, but if you're not, you can just look it up. Project 2025 is a tome. It's an 800-page tome of the far right faction that is currently controlling the controlling party in this state's interest in what they're going to do when they retake the presidency. So we are the tip of the spear for that, and part of that is this voucher plan, which is really a plan to take over our entire educational system and replace it with theocratic indoctrination and privatize it. And that's a big part of it too. And so, it's interesting to try and, I guess when I first started realizing what was going on, like a lot of people who come into my office, I said, wow, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. These bills are random. And, if we're talking about the anti-LGBTQ bills or the voucher program or, the abortion threats. And because at that time we hadn't overturned Dobbs yet. And so I took some time, like I'm sure many of you have, to actually read. And I read several books, and I'm sure you've read a lot of them. Democracy in Chains is one of them. Shadow Network is another one I highly recommend by Ann Nelson. Anyway, several books on what's going on in this country, how did we get here? And I started to really understand this 50-year strategy that has gotten us to this point under the coalition of the Council for National Policy and the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Heritage Foundation and all of those groups that, interestingly enough, 5 you will see all contributed to that document. And so they are very, very clear about who they are. They're very transparent about who they are. And that is really what all of this legislation and all of the stuff that we're doing in the state is about, because this is a place where they actually have the ability to completely do whatever they want. And without any regard for the Constitution, without any regard for any of our laws, because they are perfectly happy passing unconstitutional legislation right now, and even are trying to do so in some instances because they would like to see that legislation wend its way up to the Supreme Court to change policy. And so we are deliberately doing that stuff on a regular basis, and nobody even is trying to hide it anymore. And of course, separation of church and state is at the very core of that, because this is really an attempt to impose Christian nationalism, which really, I would argue, doesn't have a lot to do with Christianity, on our entire world, for the purpose of, a certain faction of people's greedy interests. And I think there's a lot of corporate interest that plays into that as well, with the Koch brothers and big oil. And, it impacts every part of our lives. It's certainly something that we never really talk about because we're too busy paying attention to the things that are being thrown in front of us, the ideological issues by design that are dividing us. We don't pay attention to what's going on with our environment. We don't pay attention to what's going on with our incredibly regressive economic position, which is really about our state hoarding our tax dollars and not putting them in to programs that by agreement they should be putting them into, and then giving corporations big huge returns voluntarily. We just passed a franchise excise tax return that was completely voluntary, for no reason except for that, this group of people really want to give kickbacks to big corporations. And by the way, 13 of my colleagues in the state Senate declared Rule 13, and Rule 13 is the thing that you have to declare when you have a personal interest in legislation. And basically it says, I have a personal interest in this legislation, but I swear that I am doing what I think is best for all Tennesseans. But if they're declaring Rule 13, we have to assume that they have some skin in the game in some capacity. And, when you look at what they do in their businesses, our governor being at the very top of that, you see that they're going to be getting some of those kickbacks quite directly. So really, it's a grift. And I really appreciated it when you introduced this and just, flat out said the voucher scam, because the voucher program is a scam. And it's a long game that they've been working on for some time, and they have flown people in here from the Americans for Prosperity group, which is the Koch brothers group, to push this plan. And they're getting paid a lot of money, and they're down at the legislature lobbying, but they're also out literally in the boondocks of Tennessee right now, knocking on doors and telling people to send emails to their legislators. And I am receiving literally thousands of emails from people telling me that I need to support school choice. Well, school choice sounds like an absolutely wonderful thing. Of course, everybody would be for that, right? If it was really school choice. But if you look at the program and you look at how it's played out in other states, you know that that's really not what happens. What happens is that we end up subsidizing families that are already sending their kids to private school, or people who are homeschooling, and inevitably, actually, we have a lot of people that are doing things like buying jet skis and computers, and it's going into all kinds of places that doesn't have anything to do with school. But here's the main thing, and this is the goal: it's gutting public education. These guys forever have wanted to get out of the business of public education because they saw that as a liability. They didn't want to be in the business of having its tax dollars go to public education. And finally, they decided that they'd like that just to go right back to them. And this is the vehicle through which they are doing that. And it is a travesty. It is an absolute travesty, because obviously, if we can't educate our children and we can't provide a good education in this state, then it's going to provide horrible outcomes in every facet of our state. And I know that most people would agree with that. So that sounds really awful. And I always tell people that I should probably come with a t-shirt everywhere I go that says, warning, bummer to talk to. Because it does sound really horrific. But here is the thing I truly think. I do think that we are in one of these, you know, if you read history, you know that these things come in cycles, and that we're in another, you know, strongman cycle where we've got a lot of autocrats and theocrats trying to take over the world in various capacities. And that's always when the most powerful voices come out. That's always when the greatest movements come out. That's always when we create our greatest art and write our greatest books. And this is the tip of the spear right here in Tennessee. I don't think you will find a place that is more pointedly moving in this direction than Tennessee. And so we have this unique opportunity to be at a very, very important place in a very, very important time to make a difference. And that is my greatest hope. And I do see a lot of people up at the Capitol when there weren't before, who are very passionate and absolutely determined to change the story here. And I'm optimistic that if we work together, that we can do that. And I'm grateful to all of you, because separation of church and state and building the wall that you sang about and standing firm on separation of church and state is a fundamental component of making sure that we protect our democracy. So, you know, that's generally an overview of how I see things, and I will stop there and open it up for questions if you have any questions.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it into this microphone, so if we need to. Here's one of the questions I had. Is there anything that could reduce the divisive tone of the legislative process?
That's an interesting question, because I do think that that there are a couple of different approaches that we have going on. One is, of course, the Tennessee Three, the Justins, the people standing up and saying, you know, absolutely not, and getting up with a bullhorn and saying, we're not going to do this. That is such an important thing to do, because it's called attention to what's going on. It's called international attention to what's going on. And it's made it apparent to a lot of people who didn't know before that we are living in an autocracy, that this is a totalitarian government, and that we do have horrible problems with racism and misogyny and otherism and all kinds of issues. That having been said, I truly believe that you're never going to get anywhere if you don't give people a place to go. People have to have a place to go. And so, so my general approach in the legislature is to try very hard to work with my colleagues across the aisle on issues that we can work on. And I've actually been able to get a lot done, mostly in preventing bad things from happening. Like, for example, we had a bill coming through the legislature this year that was going to pass to absolutely destroy our wetlands, because it was going to open the wetlands in Tennessee up to development, because there was a single developer in the House who wanted to be able to profit off of that. And he happens to be the chair of the Commerce Committee. And so everybody was going to capitulate to him. And we were going to pass a bill that opened up our wetlands to development, which would be an unmitigated disaster at a time when we already have horrible environmental problems in this state. So I fought very, very hard with my colleagues behind the scenes to stop that, and we did. We stopped it. A lot of people don't know that those sorts of things are happening. So the answer to your question is that I think that that divisiveness is important, because I think that if you don't speak out and you don't stand up, people are not going to be aware that there's a problem. On the other side of the coin, I think that it's a very complicated landscape and that there's some really serious legislation that could really hurt a lot of people. And then even a little bit of good legislation that you can get done if you find ways to work across the aisle. I truly, it's just how I'm wired. I believe in civility. I believe in trying to listen. I believe that that's, it's an internal calling for me. I also have the utmost respect genuinely for people who feel compelled to stand up and speak out and not do that. So I think it takes both.
Are there any questions coming in?
I only
Peter?
had one come in so far. Then they had said, let me make sure we right. That some rural educators are speaking out against the voucher bill. Is that gonna create any movement? The fact that the rural folks are not in lockstep.
Yes, absolutely. And not only that, in my negative diatribe that I just unloaded on you guys, I have to say that I am actually right at this particular moment in time, which could change, in a couple days. But right now, I am optimistic that the voucher plan might not pass because the House and the Senate are very far apart. The House has added about $200 million in I guess you call them earmarks or whatever, things that they promises that they've made to various people to get them on board. Whereas the Senate is pushing a pure bill that's just exactly, for the most part, what Lee wanted. And so that $200 million differential, if you start to pull at those strings, you start losing people. And I really think that it's going to be very difficult for them to get from here to there. And moreover, I know that some of my colleagues would really like to see it fail because they know fundamentally that this is the wrong thing to do and that it's not popular amongst their constituents. And they're kind of between a rock and a hard place with that because they know that a lot of their constituents are really unhappy with it, but they also know that the governor really, really wants them to do it. And so for it just to not be, a reconcilable issue between the Senate and the House would probably make them happy. So I'm optimistic that those keep pushing rural teachers out there if anyone's listening, because we need everybody to really, really put on the gas pushing against this voucher program for this next week. I'm hearing we're supposed to get out not next week, but the week after. So just one more week.
You want to just go ahead and.
Should I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay.
And then I've got a couple more over here.
Okay, good.
Heidi, it's such an honor for you to be speaking to us
Oh,
about this important topic.
An honor for me.
I have two questions. The first one was when you mentioned that they're going to the rural homes and door knocking. Is there any group that's following up or going side by side to educate at the doors where these people are going?
Yes, but it's like the difference between a raindrop and an ocean. I mean, maybe not that dramatic, but they have way, way more money, way, way more people. The problem is we don't have the financial incentives, and this is always kind of the problem with, with people who are fighting against movements like this, that we don't have the financial wherewithal resources to combat it. So while there are people following up, they tend to be, volunteers who are doing it because they really care, juxtaposed to people who are being paid.
I kind of wanted to know where they were going on. The other question was when you said that you were getting a lot of constituents' emails, how do you respond? Do you have a pat educational email response?
I do. I'd be glad to send it
I'd like
to
to hear
you.
that.
I do. I'd be glad to send it to you. So my response is to actually talk about Christian nationalism and to talk about the direction that we're going, and to say, that and to cite. I give some links that I've tried very hard to make them nonpartisan links, even though it's very hard to do that. But I've tried really hard to find the most, middle of the road kinds of data that I can find, because it's crazy, but everything, we all have different facts at this point. To just tell people what's happened in other states. 82% of people in Arizona that use vouchers are private school families. 95% of people in Arkansas, for example. So it's full of data. And then, also I truly believe that if we can get away from talking about these ideological issues, because I think a lot of what my colleagues have used to get people on board with the voucher concept to talk about how people are trying to groom kids and how, it's out of control, that people are trying to indoctrinate kids with wokeism and things like that. As much as we can get away from that conversation and talk about the money, I think that we're going to do better, because I think that everybody cares if they're being stolen from. Everybody cares if they're going to be in a situation where their kids are not going to have any public school options or any school options. So, I mean, really thinking about the kitchen table issues and what really is a problem for people every single day, I think is a great way to sort of counteract this ideological battle that we're having right now. And so, so my email basically talks about how bad this is going to be for them and for the state of Tennessee. And here's how we know, because it's happened in other states. And then I asked them the question, actually start with asking them the question is, would you mind telling me why you're for vouchers? Because I'd love for them to email me back, and some of them have. And I've actually been able to turn, a handful of people by doing that. So I do think that, if a lot of us were doing that, perhaps we could change the landscape. But I also know, because we polled this, that most Tennesseans are opposed to vouchers. So, and my colleagues, I think, are starting to be aware of that.
It's true
as
in
well.
every state.
Yes, right.
Is it gonna get them to vote differently?
I think that they're not wanting to vote. So what happens when you have such a big difference between the House and the Senate version is they either decide that they're not going to be able to reconcile it and they don't even bring it up for a vote, or we vote on our respective packages and then they have a conference committee where they're supposed to somehow find common ground. There's no way they can find common ground with the $200 million differential, and a lot of the things that they put in the bill in the House sound fabulous. I mean, they're talking about increasing teacher salaries. They're talking about getting rid of third grade retention, all kinds of stuff that really actually we would, a lot of us, I think, would very much support. And of course, the big grift and the entree of the whole thing is the voucher program. So I think that the differences in the plans and of course the money involved are going to make it hard for them to reconcile. And I think inevitably, as to whether or not they would vote against it, I think their hope is to not have to vote.
So we,
I'm sorry, I want to stop us in the room for a minute because we have a lot of online questions and I want to make sure that they get heard. And I'm going to go in order. And online folks, I'm going to take you in order. One person asks, say more about the education commissioner.
You might repeat it.
Oh, yeah. So say more about the education commissioner. Well, I'd say something about two education commissioners. So we had an education commissioner who was brought in here for the purposes of completely reformatting the way that we fund our schools. And so we went from the basic education plan to the TISA, Tennessee Investment in Student Tax formula, last session. And the reason that we did that is because we wanted to the reason that the governor had us do that is they wanted it to set everything up so we were monetizing children as units, juxtaposed to giving money to programs. In the BEP formula, the prior formula, we were funding programs, LEAs, we were funding, school systems. Now we fund students as units and we give them each $6,735 or something like that. And then it's weighted You know, if they have ESL issues or if they have learning differences, then, you know, we add more money to that and students can have up to $10,000 or something like that. Don't quote me on those numbers, but roughly coming to them. The reason, of course, that we unitize those children is to prepare ourselves for this voucher plan where we were going to be giving exactly $7,000 something for each student, so that that money could be sent directly to, you know, whatever evangelical hedge fund program decided to swoop in and take over that. And by the way, not dissimilar to Core Civic and the way that the Core Civic people took over our prison system. You know, that whole idea of taking over what I believe are things that should not be privatized and because they don't comport well to a privatized market, because they are not supposed to be profit motivated, is really problematic. And for anybody, and I'm sure many of you have, who've looked at how Core Civic and our prison system has worked under that, you know that it has been an absolute disaster. Because what happens there is that they are incentivized to get more people into prison. And you can see that our laws have followed that because they make money when we get more people into prison. This is going to be the same thing with the school. They are going to make more money by getting more and more students to buy into this voucher program or to want to participate in this voucher program. So they are going to be incentivized to continue to fuel the idea that this voucher program is wonderful. And hey, come on to my Hillsdale College or come on to my whatever it is. You know, it's mostly Hillsdale at this point that they want to do. So the second commissioner, the first commissioner set up that program and got us all set up so that we could do this. The second commissioner, Lizette Reynolds, was brought in basically to keep her mouth shut. And she has not been able to do that. And unfortunately, it's become very apparent that she has no idea what she's talking about and that she's not qualified for the position. And that is a little bit of a PR problem for them. And so they're trying to deal with whether or not they're going to have to, because now the controlling party actually has people from their own party telling them that they need to do something about this commissioner because she's lied on some forms saying that she had been employed for 6 months so that she could be subsidized in her continuing education so that she could be qualified to have the position that she has. But mainly when we watch her in committees talking about this unbelievably important process that's going on, she seems to have absolutely no idea what's going on and is unable to answer the simplest questions. And it's rather alarming.
Great. We'll get one more from here, then we'll jump back into the room. How can we increase voter turnout? It's dismal in Tennessee.
Yes, we are, after the last election, unfortunately, dead last for voter turnout. And that is by design. We have passed laws that have made voting difficult. And also, we have created a climate that makes, you know, a lot of people feel ambivalent and like it's hopeless and it's not worthwhile. And I completely understand that. I understand that people feel that way. But let me just tell you, we are not necessarily a deep far right state. We are a state that doesn't vote. And I truly believe that if more people in Tennessee knew what was going on, and especially, as I said, with the money, because we haven't even gotten into the grift that's going on with all of the contracts. I serve on fiscal review, and I can just tell you right now that so much of our state money is going into friends and buddies' pockets and into, you know, out of state businesses that have no business taking our money. It's lots and lots of grift going on in our state government. I truly believe that if most Tennesseans knew that they would be upset about that and that they would be inclined to vote differently. And I'm not saying that that's a partisan thing. I'm not saying they need to vote for Democrats or Republicans. I'm saying they need to vote for people who give a damn. I am saying that they need to vote for people they can trust and people who are not there for their own personal profit. And right now, that is not the case. Right now, we have a lot of people in the state government who are there for their own personal profit. And we see that in every faction of our government. So how can we get people to vote is the question. I think the answer is we have to go out and have uncomfortable conversations with people that we don't normally talk to, with people who are not in our bubbles, with people who are not in the groups that, you know, make us feel good and release endorphins when we have conversations. We have to talk to people who, you know, our parents told us you should never talk about politics and religion with, you know? I mean, we have to have those conversations because, and I don't think they need to be proselytizing conversations because I'm not a fan of proselytizing. I think maybe one of the best things we can do is listen. Spend some time listening to people and figuring out what they're concerned about, give them the opening to talk to us about what concerns them. And then that could be a launching point to talk about, you know, whatever specific issues those may be, because people, I think when they open up, will present issues to you so that you can actually say, well, yeah, me too, I care about education, but did you know, by the way, that they're changing our whole education system? Or, you know, whatever the subject is. I care about women's rights. Did you, you know, there are lots of things, obviously, to talk about.
Yeah, because that's what another questioner said, what's the best thing we can do to help these people running against the theocrats get elected? There are a lot of people running for offices, more than have been in the past. A lot of these people are not running unopposed this time. So, you know, just how can we spread the word? Is that sort of what you just were saying?
Yeah, and I'll also say there are Charles Effelman, and there are some people that really worked very hard, and I'm so proud of them and so thankful to them to actually get some candidates to step up and run against most people this time. And so I would say, no matter what, wherever you are, please do go out and physically support whoever is running. Go out and knock on doors, go, you know, to their events, go be there and cheer them on and, you know, participate in the process, because we need that more than ever this time.
So a couple more, but we want to go back to the room now, just to be fair. I know we had some room questions.
Just right along the line you're talking about right now, the horrific covenant issue was obviously terrible, and we watched those women be dismissed by our legislators. And was it bad enough that those women and maybe their families and whoever else will vote differently?
Yeah, well, I do think that those women are voting differently, and that those families are voting differently, and that was a huge awakening for that group of people to come up there and find out that no matter what, that this was an intractable situation. To the point where today on the Senate floor, we actually passed a bill that is absolutely meaningless legislation, but almost just a poke in the eye for them, because it was legislation that said that we would not allow an ERPO, an extreme risk protection order, to pass in the state of Tennessee. I mean, which is ridiculous, because we're already precluded from doing that, and it's a resolution, and it's kind of ridiculous legislation, but it is meant to send a message. And the message is coming from the gun manufacturers and the NRA and the Tennessee Firearms Association. And they are saying, not only are we not going to put up with these pushbacks on our Second Amendment freedoms, but on top of it, we're going to make damn sure that you all understand that we are absolutely going in the other direction. And you need to know that. It's a very, very militant approach. And it's really sad, because the Covenant families are still up there. But I also have to point out, and that's in my district, by the way, and they're an amazing group of people, and they're still down there at every session and you know, trying. And I'll also say, you know, lots of Black children and lots of other children have been shot across our state way before that happened, and lots since that happened. Since that happened, 54 children have been shot and killed in our state. 54 children. My office is tracking that. It's tnunderthegun.com if people want to see the gun violence statistics in this state. I did pass a bill that's going to require the Department of Health to inform legislators of gun statistics every single year. Because of course they don't want to see that and they need to see it, but that having, and also another bill, to inform them about suicides, because most suicides, guess what, are done with guns. But 1,000, you can look at the website, but I think it's like 1,500 something shootings, have happened since the Covenant shooting in this state. Anything else, you know, if it's cars and something wrong with cars, if it was some product that our kids, a toy our kids were getting, something we were eating, we would be ballistic, we'd be apoplectic about that. We would be figuring out a way to solve that problem as fast as we could, right? But we cannot do that when it comes to the issue of guns, because that is all tied up in this, you know, Christian nationalist movement and the idea of freedom. We're having a big fight right now in this country about what freedom is. And I believe freedom is the freedom to have my kids go to school without getting shot by a gun. They believe that freedom is the right to carry a gun any damn place you please and use it anytime you want.
Here's one, and this is, I think this echoes what a lot of people are feeling right now. It's like, I feel powerless to affect any change with the current legislature. I email my reps, which takes time, and feel like it's a useless effort. So what can I do?
Yeah, and there is a degree to which it's a useless effort. But I do think volume is important. I hear my colleagues on a regular basis say, you know what, I can't, I've gotten something like 500 emails about that. So one thing I would say is, and I don't, if you're sending emails, I don't necessarily think the content of the emails is that important. What I do think is, if you can get volume, if you can get a bunch of people to join you in sending an email about, oddly enough, the emails that I've gotten the most about are trot lines. There were trot lines that would go across rivers and for fishing.
Yeah.
And I guess people had gotten caught in them, and somebody had almost been beheaded, if not, it was dangerous. And somebody, I don't know who, but you know, kudos to them, because they got thousands of people to send emails about these trot lines. And it was incredibly effective. So I will say that volume, if you can actually get a lot of people to join you in writing emails, it's worth it. And then the other thing I'll say is to go down to the legislature in person and meet with people can be impactful, especially, you know, when there are also other people coming with you, because that can be you know, something that can make a difference in, you know, if you have numbers.
Here's something, this is a comment versus a question. It's don't say we passed, you didn't pass these bad bills, they did.
Oh.
Say the supermajority in the legislature voted for these bills.
You're right. I should change the way I talk about that, because it sounds like I was on board with it. I sort of am disgusted sometimes to be part of a body that's passing this stuff, and so I sort of am owning it a little bit, just because I feel like I'm in that room. But you're right. I will try and say they more often. Good suggestion.
I have a couple of other things here, but those are more things directed to us, things we can do as a chapter, so they're not specific
Yeah.
questions.
One, if you could explain this to me, and I'm not sure just exactly what it is, but you were talking about something that was kind of like a poke in the eye a minute ago. Wasn't there a similar thing that happened recently regarding adoption?
Mhm.
I'm not sure what the details are, but, so I don't want to ask the wrong question, but can you tell us what that was?
Right. Well, we've had all kinds of bills around adoption this year that have been really bad. I mean, there was one bill around adoption that said that people who adopted kids and didn't want to recognize their gender, how they identified or any, were not allowed, the kids, they were allowed to not have to do that. Which is such an incredibly personal issue, and obviously, you know, just plays into all of this anti-LGBTQ and really anti-trans stuff. There's also two of the most awful bills that we've passed recently have just been in the past 2 days in the Senate. I call them handmaid's tale bills. They passed. They passed these bills that disallowed anybody who is not a parent of a child from taking the child out of the state for either an abortion, and then the next bill, the other bill, was for gender affirming care. And so for the first one, the abortion one, I asked the question of the sponsor. I said, what if this child has been raped by their father? Then do they have to, and they've gotten pregnant, then do they have to ask the father for permission to go out of state to get an abortion? And the answer is yes. The father is the person who gets to decide. And so that's horrific. And they passed that. And then with the or the anti-gender affirming care bill, my question was, what if we have a cisgender child because gender affirming care is not always about choosing a different gender. We have cisgender children who, need gender affirming care because of their development as well. And so my main point in all of these things is that it is absolutely ludicrous that this group of people are weighing in on complex medical issues at all. They have no business doing it. We are not doctors, and we do not understand the complexities of it. And moreover, it's none of our business. Those decisions should be made between families and their doctors. And so that's the conversation and the message that I continuously try to give, which oddly enough comports with the concept in my mind of parental rights. But once again, we're talking about how we see freedom differently. They see parental rights a completely different way. Another thing I'll add is I had this week some school librarians to my office, and they were concerned about the Age Appropriate Materials Act, which we passed, which they passed. I'm working on it, which they passed, that basically said that we couldn't have any materials in our school libraries that contained violence, sexuality, nudity. It's a long list. And because there's a phrase in there that says in whole or in part, these librarians were concerned because they consulted with legal experts and have found that they're really going to have to clear out their libraries. I mean, they're going to have to completely clear out their libraries because, we're talking about biology books, the Bible, Jane Eyre, Scarlet Letter, Shakespeare, right? They all contain some component of sexuality. We're talking about, there are animals in children's books that are nude that are not appropriate under this. We're talking about clearing out libraries. And so they asked me, where is this in its process? And my heart almost just went 7 stories down. I had to tell them that it's on its way to the governor's desk. It's passed through the Senate, it's passed through the House, and it is on its way to be signed. And so, that's probably going to happen. They have to clear out these libraries, and my colleagues might say, oh, that's ridiculous, they're overreacting. No, they are not overreacting, because you've put them in a position where they're criminals if they don't do this. And this is what we've done to doctors, and this is what we're doing to teachers. And by the way, they also passed a bill to allow teachers to be armed. In our schools, teachers do not want to be armed. They did not get involved in teaching because they wanted to shoot people. And parents are not allowed to know which teachers have guns. And so I would feel very, very uncomfortable about my kid going into a classroom if I didn't know whether or not that teacher was armed all day long. Because, who knows what can happen. I maintain, and this is how much I've had to distill this comment, because it's, of the crazy comments we get into when it comes to guns. This is the one comment I make that I'm sorry is logically unassailable. You cannot have gun violence without guns. Okay? And that you can't argue with that. And so if you're bringing a gun into the classroom, you are increasing the likelihood of gun violence. So let's just make it that simple. And still, of course, there's no movement on that. But anyway.
And I'm going to paraphrase this one a little bit. It's like, why aren't the evangelicals more up in arms over the Covenant shooting? Because it indicated that private schools aren't safer than bad public schools, or what they call bad public schools, and that the shooter was a transgender person.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. First of all, there are a lot of people who say the shooter was not a transgender person, so I'm not sure that's true. That may or may not be true. But there is a bill, or was it a resolution? I think we passed a bill that requires the police to release the manifesto because of that. Because my colleagues, I think, would like to use that. I think they'd like to get a hold of that information and disseminate that information to make the argument that the problem is not the guns. The problem is the transgenderism. Moreover, what they really want to do is they want to tie gun violence to SSRIs. They want to say that everybody who is committed gun violence, or that the preponderance of people who have done it are on SSRIs, which are, psychological drugs that people take for various different things to mitigate, issues that they're having psychologically. And so they're constantly doing acrobatics to try and figure out ways to say it's not the guns. And the reason that they want that information is so that they can say, first of all, this was a very disturbed person who was transgender, and, they needed to get right with God and, have a preacher preach it out of them or whatever. And also they might have been on SSRIs. And so the person who asked that question is very smart, because that's exactly where they're headed with it.
Anybody else in the room have a question? So just a couple of things. Thank you first for doing this. It was terrific and exactly what we were hoping to hear, what's happening in the legislature. And you bring a glimmer of hope anyway. I was sitting there, I started to write down a question when you talked about Tennessee, kind of the spearhead here.
Mhm.
So many people that I know teachers who've retired early because they just can't do this anymore. And I know a lot of young people who just don't want anything to do with the system, especially after what happened to Gloria Johnson and Justin Pearson and Justin Jones. And it can be discouraging. You read things like a very large majority of Tennesseans favor some kind of gun control, but the legislature is overwhelmingly, poking the people in the eye, as you say. So I heard you say that numbers are important, and those of you who are paying attention to this meeting online will have this online, so that people who aren't able to be here at this time can hear it, and maybe we can get the snowball rolling downhill and get some people up there. A lot of us have been there in the legislature, mostly in the House, and it's discouraging. So it's good to hear that there's something we can keep pushing to. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I will say this, I'll do a carrot and a stick here.
All right.
I'll say that for those of you, and I'm sure a lot of you have, when I was driving here tonight, I was talking to my husband, and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to go talk to Separation of Church and State." And we both almost simultaneously said, "Oh, that's going to be a smart group of people." I mean, it's obvious that, people who understand the importance of separation in church and state understand that democracy depends on it, right? And that's not an anti-religious thing. That's saying that we all should have the ability and the power, of course, to exercise our own religious beliefs. And if any one religion is imposing their views upon us, of course, we can't. I'm preaching to the choir, because this is what you talk about constantly, I'm sure. That having been said, I don't know how many people out there listening have actually spent time in a theocracy, spent time in a country. When I was a kid, I went to work for Save the Children in Tunisia, Africa, and I saw what it was like to live in a place where you do not have the freedom to practice your own religion and where, quite frankly, you're not allowed to do very much as a woman. And it was a really, really edifying and an important experience in my life. And as much as it may be uncomfortable and unpleasant to deal with what we're dealing with down at the legislature, I just proffer, and this is the stick, that it could be a lot worse. And that we are at an inflection point right now where it's going to be a lot worse if we don't step up. And democracy, I think in this country, a lot of us, and I was certainly guilty of this for many years, take it for granted. And it's not a spectator sport. And right now, we have a responsibility to step up and do something about it. And that's all of us, every single one of us, because if we lose it, it's not a good place to live. It's not. And you know, keep in mind that as we're frogs boiling in pots and every single little thing gets taken away, that we were apoplectic when we found out that the trigger ban was going to happen and that women were losing their reproductive rights. And here we are over a year later, and because there has been this constant news cycle of craziness going on, we aren't even really talking about it anymore because there's always something new to talk about. And that is by design. And it's a very, very effective way. And, you know, when you look back at places where people have lost their democracies and their freedoms, this is how they do it. That's how it's done. And so we have to be vigilant in maintaining our resolve that that is not acceptable and that we cannot let that happen. And then I will say that the carrot or the good part is that I actually do see a lot of young people who are absolutely determined to do something. Quite frankly, environment being their number one issue, which is actually my number one issue as well, because if we don't have a habitable planet, everything else is irrelevant. So, you know, so I think that, number one, please feel optimistic because there are a lot of people out there and it's visceral. You can feel it up there that there is a movement and we are going in that direction. And number two, please, for the love of God or the love of whatever, show up. Show up. We need you.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.